Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Janie. I want to welcome you to today's presentations. There has never been a better time to think about the long game. And again, thank you for joining us. I am a project manager with the Great Lakes Trade Adjustment Assistance Center. This webinar is co-sponsored by the Regional Growth Partnership, known as RGP. Northern Ohio Regional Economic Development is known as NORAD. William Vaughn Company and the Great Lakes Trade Adjustment Assistance Center, also known as GLTAAC or sometimes Great Lakes TAAC. Before I introduce today's presenters, I'd like to mention a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available after the event. Also, presenter slide decks will be shared after the event as well. For questions of the presenters, we ask all participants to type the questions in the chat box anytime during the presentations and throughout the webinar. I will address the questions to each presenter at the end after all presentations are complete. Today, we will be discussing what's next, strategies for Northwest Ohio, small and mid-sized manufacturers, including a $75,000 federal matching fund program for import impacted firms. Our co-sponsors for the event, Northwest Ohio Regional Economic Development, NORAD, a nonprofit association of economic development practitioners and partners spanning 12 counties in Northwest Ohio. NORAD provides a forum for exchange of information among its members and others aimed at increasing job opportunities and improving the quality of life throughout the region. William Vaughn Company, a full-service accounting firm and advisory firm that has been providing clients the boutique feel of a small firm and a far-reaching business experience and financial depth of a national practice. Regional Growth Partnership is one of 6 partners of Jobs Ohio. RGP is a lead economic development group serving the Toledo region and the 17 counties of Northwest Ohio. RGP attracts investment, new business, and high-quality jobs to the Northwest Ohio region while working collaboratively with our economic development partners. And lastly, we have the Great Lakes Trade Adjustment Assistance Center, a federally funded nonprofit organization that provides business assistance to manufacturers that have been hurt by imports. We bring the TAAF programs to firms in Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan. Great Lakes TAAC provides matching fund assistance for up to $75,000 that can be used to tackle crucial initiatives within your company. And for those who are just joining us, I'd like to just welcome you and just a quick reminder, please, as you have questions that come in, type them into the chat box. I will be reviewing the chat box and I will then read the question to each presenter as you wish. So for our first speaker today, we have Ms. Kate Matz. Kate is a certified CPA, CIPA, and a partner at William Vaughn Company. Today, Kate's talk is titled Beyond PPP. Thank you, Kate, for sharing your expertise with us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Janie. I'm happy to be here with everybody. Do we have the slides available to go here?
I think they're coming right up.
Okay. Well, what I wanted to start out with is just talking a little bit about where we are, where we've been. Go ahead and advance to the next one. There we go. All right, so big picture, major phases. What have we been going through, these past several months, and what's coming for the future? So March is really when we started to see shutdown of businesses. Various states across the country were declaring it at a little bit different times, but we kind of saw the wave there of the shutdown of non-essential businesses. Moving into April and May, then, these small and mid-market companies shifted into really looking at what are some relief options for me here, right? So I'm shut down, I can't be operating, or if I am operating, it's not at full capacity. what's available for me. And for a lot of people, that was looking to the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program. So starting out with, how do I apply? How much can I get? All that good stuff. Now that we're on the back end of May, most of those folks have really started to shift into looking at forgiveness. How does forgiveness work? What are the rules? How can I maximize it? Are there pieces I should hang on to? Looking at all of those types of things. I will note that there are PPP funds that are still available. So if you're talking with folks that have not participated yet in that program, maybe they've been sitting out on the sidelines because they weren't really sure what the rules were or if they were going to need it. They wanted some things to shake out a little bit. Or maybe somebody on the smaller end that really hadn't had the advice and counsel to get going on it earlier. There are still funds available. But most folks are in that 8-week period of looking at what kind of costs do I include here as far as what I can look at for forgiveness. As we move then into June in the future, and some are starting this now, really looking at what's the restart recovery look like, what sort of business model adjustments might need to be made. You know, there's a lot of different thoughts as far as what this recovery is going to look like. So there might be some tweaks that you kind of need to look at, or even a little bit, you know, the midterm or longer term going forward. Next slide, please. I do want to spend just a few minutes here talking about some of the key updates to PPP. So this program, you know, it was part of the CARES Act that was really rushed through Congress very quickly, didn't have time to get it out there for a comment period. And as such, it's been continuing to evolve as we go. There aren't daily updates, but sometimes it feels like there are almost daily updates. So we're getting a lot of interim final rules or FAQs coming out by the SBA and Treasury. And you know, the most recent significant one of those was last Friday, and that built upon the forgiveness application that came out the previous Friday. So I'm going to note here just what some of the kind of key takeaways from that were. But before that, I'll just kind of caveat with saying that it still was a little bit disappointing. There are still many unanswered questions, and you know, we really think that they missed an opportunity to simplify some things in some areas. So still some pretty complex calculations when you get into certain components of it with the FTEs and with looking at compensation reductions. There's a lot of different time periods to compare against, a lot of math and comparison to do. So it's pretty administratively burdensome, unfortunately, for companies to be able to comply with what they need to. But some good news, there was some flexibility that was added for this 8-week period. So you get this loan money, and then you've got 8 weeks essentially to use the loan money on eligible cost to be counted towards forgiveness. A lot of concern about this 8 weeks, pretty difficult to use the money when you're not operating. This ruling did provide a little bit of flexibility there, in that you can count things that were paid as well as things that were incurred during the 8 weeks. So how that works is on the front end, you count something that you paid that was incurred previously. On the back end, you get to pick up costs that you've incurred but haven't yet paid. So effectively, you are including more than 8 weeks worth of cost in that period. The other thing that was interesting was rent and utilities. So there is specific language in there that prohibits prepayments on mortgage interest. There is no such language prohibiting prepayments on rent and utilities. So they kind of left the door open for prepayments there that could also count during that 8-week period. The other thing that was good to see, they did clarify that there is no double penalty for FTE reductions and wage and salary reductions. So you start out with looking at what's the total amount of eligible costs that I've had during the period, and then you start looking at what potential reductions might I need to take to come up with my forgiveness amount. One of those reductions is if you have fewer employees, so fewer full-time equivalents, and another one is if you have reduced the wages or salaries by more than 25%. previously, it looked like those were going to kind of pile up on top of each other. The guidance that came out last Friday said, no, those aren't, piling on top of each other. If you've got one employee that kind of meets both of those, you're only going to get dinged once on it. So that was good to see. What wasn't good to see, however, is there's quite a bit of restrictions on self-employed individuals and what amounts of their compensation gets included for forgiveness. So basically, all of the benefits that the company is paying on their behalf do not count towards forgiveness, and they are actually limited to the 2019 compensation that they had as well. So unfortunately, the self-employed folks are going to be getting hit much harder on this than what seems like maybe was the intent. So hopefully we'll see some changes coming from that. Future things with PPP and guidance, we do expect more guidance to continue to come out as well. There are a couple of bills that are working their way through Congress right now, one introduced by the Senate, one introduced by the House, and they seem to have some legs. So what it looks like we might see is taking that 8-week period and extending that out. One of the proposals was for 16 weeks, one was 24, but anything above that 8 weeks would really help companies out a lot with being able to get this loan forgiven. The other thing then that is part of that is a change to the 75% rule. So in order to achieve full forgiveness, you must spend at least 75% of the loan funds that you received on payroll cost. That is not actually part of the original CARES Act. That was a ruling that came out later, and there's some question as to whether that was overstepping what they should have done, but it looks like that's one of the things that Congress potentially could change and open things up a bit. So stay tuned. We haven't heard the last on PPP. Let's move on and talk a little bit about how to maximize forgiveness given the current rules that are in place. Want to flip to the next slide? Perfect. So some strategies to think about now, bonuses and hazard pay. That's certainly something that you can look at, and that was explicitly allowed in this latest guidance that did come out. We're seeing a lot of folks looking at bonuses and hazard pay as a way to help bridge the gap between what their employees could be making on unemployment right now, which in some cases is more than they'd actually be working if they came back to work with their normal pay. So in some cases, we're seeing this, COVID premium or hazard pay as a way to help bridge that gap and incentivize those employees to come back and get things restarted. With these, that does go towards the overall limitation of compensation, of cash compensation, to $15,385 per person. And that is just what the equivalent amount is for the 8-week period of somebody making $100,000 per year. So you're kind of you're capped at that $100,000 annual limit for cash compensation. Profit sharing contributions is another thing to think about. So if you're a company that makes profit sharing contributions once per year, look at bringing those contributions into your 8-week period, making them there, and that counts as part of the paid cost that can go towards forgiveness. We talked about this paid and incurred concept a minute ago, but a couple of other things to kind of think through with that would be rent payments. So we did see a lot of businesses either holding back making rent payments just to preserve some cash, or potentially they've gotten a rent deferral from their landlord. A strategy to look at how do I maximize forgiveness would be catch up on those rent payments during this 8-week period. And then you can look at maybe deferring the deferral of your rent payments until later in the year. So you still get kind of the break on the cash flow overall from the year, but if you make the payments during the 8-week period, you get to count those towards your forgiveness amount. Prepay rent utilities, we talked about that a little bit. The other thing to look at here would be related party rentals. So a lot of times related party rentals might be done at below market rates, right? So you've got one entity that is the operating entity. You've got another entity that owns the real estate, and there's some rentals in between. If that is below market rate, you can look at potentially increasing that. That strategy does have a little bit of risk. You got to kind of make sure that you have your documentation in line, but that is something to consider doing as well. Bottom line is we want to use good business sense. So, you know, maximizing forgiveness is a good thing to strive for, but only to the extent that the dollars that we're spending, that cash that's going out the door to get the forgiveness, is grounded in good business sense, right? So once it's gone, it's gone. And if you spend it on things that don't really further your business needs, not money well spent. So it's not necessarily a terrible answer to get to the end of the 8 weeks and have some funds left over that you didn't spend during the 8 weeks and aren't going to be forgiven, but they turn into a 1% interest rate loan that then you can use on future cash needs. So always come back to that, you know, does it make good business sense? Next slide, please. All right, so here's some things to think about. What should I do now beyond, you know, dealing with PPP, right? That's not the only thing that we're all trying to think about. One would be to look at your defensive interval. So the defensive interval is a measurement of the cash that you have on hand and basically how long will it last, assuming that you don't get any more revenue coming in. So your quick assets, your cash, any other marketable securities that you'd be okay parting with, and divide that by your daily cash operating expenses. So it's going to tell you then, you know, for X amount of cash that I've got, here's how long I can kind of continue going on paying my normal operating expenses before I run out of cash. It's a good rule of thumb just to have, keep in the back of your mind, and that will help guide some decisions about, hey, do I need to look at ways to reduce those operating expenses so I can extend that time period out. Cash flow forecast is kind of taking things then to the next level. So looking at, now that things are starting to restart, what does the revenue look like coming in? What does the expenses look like coming out? Where might I have some shortfalls? And what sort of levers could I do or could I pull to try to fill those gaps? A lot of times that's going to lead right into having conversations with your customers and with your vendors, right? So you kind of need to understand where your customers are with their recovery to know what your inflow of cash is going to look like. Are they starting up? What sort of demand do they think that they're going to have, so that that's going to kind of pull through to you? Are they going to be able to pay you on time? So even if they're operating and buying things from you, are they asking for extended terms for paying you? So those conversations with your customers are very important. Conversations with your vendors are also very important. So we've had a lot of companies that have dealt with some pretty significant supply chain disruptions. And, you know, looking at, once you go to restart, are you going to be able to source the materials that you need? Do you need to look at alternate sources? Looking at, can you extend some payment terms with your vendors also? Last thing I'll note here is renegotiate loans and leases. So we talked a little bit about leases and taking those deferrals that may have been offered and shifting those out into later in the year to allow you to make those payments during the 8-week period, capture forgiveness. But certainly if you've got lease agreements that are coming up for renewal, now's a great time to kind of put everything back out on the table, renegotiate all of those terms. With loans, you know, I've never seen banks be so flexible with modifying loan terms. And, you know, they're doing this with the full backing of the SBA. So it's kind of given them the ability to do that. But, you know, anything from deferral of principal payments to deferral of principal and interest payments to actually the government kind of coming in and making those payments for a period of time. So if you haven't yet had those conversations with your bank about looking at loan terms, certainly that's something I would recommend doing just to free up some more flexibility. So I think, you know, nobody really knows what this recovery is going to look like, and as much flexibility as we can kind of build in, that will just help sustain things as we go out into the future. Next slide, please. All right, so then as we look into this future, scenario planning is always a good way to go. So we hear a lot of talk about, this recovery be a V shape, a U shape, or a W shape, and nobody really knows, right? We don't know what this virus has in store for us. But if we go back to that concept of that defensive interval and of those cash flow forecasts and look at those under these various scenarios, so you kind of start with a baseline, here's where I am today, and then you say, okay, what would it be if I had this V-shaped recovery? What would it be if it was more extended like a U? What if it's a W and we get that second wave coming in? How does that change what my cash flow is going to look like? Again, this is all about planning, building in those plans so that as you start to see some of these things play out, you've got that playbook that you're able to refer to and start making some of those changes and making those decisions. Being strategic during this time. So every company I've ever worked with has this laundry list of projects that they want to get to, haven't been able to get to, right? Could be things to increase efficiency. It could be things on the people front. Maybe it's an IT project. Whatever it is, there's always this laundry list of things that you never get to. Well, as we've got, slowdown in some of the activity, this might be a time to resurrect some of those projects and say, hey, where can we make some progress on these things? You've got PPP funds to use on payroll, and you've got people that aren't busy doing their normal job. Can you deploy them in a way that's going to strengthen your company and set it up for success through that recovery period? With that, I think looking at a people strategy. So part of it is using the people that you've got on hand in creative ways. But part of it is also, we came out of a period of unprecedented low unemployment, and we had this huge labor shortage. Everybody was scrambling to get labor, right? Now, really, really quickly, we went the other direction, and we've got a lot of unemployment. So there's going to be a lot of changes in the marketplace because all of these companies are not going to be coming back online at the same time. They're not going to be, fully ramped up right away either. So there's going to be opportunity to tap into some labor that maybe you haven't been able to. So what's your people strategy? How are you recruiting those folks? How are you going to onboard them to your company, to your needs once you get in there? And then how are you going to retain them? So I think this actually provides an opportunity for strong companies to take advantage of some of that change in the labor force. Last thing I'll leave you with is to just be creative and look at ways to pivot. So, take a step back, look at what are your core competencies, what sort of resources do you have, what do you bring to the table, what are the market needs, and how do you bring those together? So is there a way that you can bring those together in a different creative way so that you're able to kind of jumpstart your recovery? This could be a different product or service than you have produced before, or it could be the same product or service, but taking it to market in a different way. So we're looking at what are our core competencies, what do we do well, and how do we kind of tweak that or tailor that in order to meet what the current market needs are. All right, next, please. So that's all for me. If you do want more information, we've got 2 webinars coming up on PPP loan forgiveness. One is later today at 1 o'clock. The second is next Thursday at 2 o'clock. And then we also have a PPP loan forgiveness calculator that we're making available for free that will be posted out to our website later today as well. So visit the COVID-19 Resource Center on our website for more information on any of that, or feel free to reach out directly to me as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kate. I appreciate your time this morning. Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Paul Zito. Paul is a Vice President of International Development at RGP, which is the Regional Growth Partnership. Paul has over 20 years experience in the global markets. Today, he's going to be talking about foreign direct investment and export support. Thank you so much, Paul, for sharing your expertise with us this morning. And your slides will be forthcoming.
Excellent.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Janie and Carmen and Scott with the Great Lakes Trade Adjustment Assistance Center. The GLTAAC sounds very complicated, but one thing I love about it, it's very simple. One of the most simple federal programs available. I encourage you out there to explore that program for companies in your county, your region, or your clients. Also, great thanks to NORAD, Will Burns, and to Matt Gilroy of Fulton County, and president of NORAD, for embracing this event. And thanks to Kate and her colleagues at William Vaughn, Owen Beck, Mike Hanf, and many others who support international development in Northwest Ohio. There's a lot of bad news out there. Every event that I had planned for the next few months has been canceled or postponed until next year. However, I'm very much an optimist when it comes to international trade and development. As Kate mentioned, we don't know if we're going to have a U, a V, or a W-shaped recovery. However, most analysts, particularly on the international front, are very positive about late 2020 and next year. I believe very much in the Gestalt method of economic and industry analysis. So I pull bits and pieces from sources such as the Financial Times, PricewaterhouseCoopers, BBC, the German Chambers of Commerce, JETRO, the Japan External Trade Organization, Biggins, Lacey and Shapiro, OCO Global, WowTech, Conway, and many others that you've probably heard of. But perhaps most simply, I think it was April 14th or so, the IMF, International Monetary Fund, projected that for 2020, the US economy would shrink by 5.9%. Ouch. However, that's not as bad as many people thought. Luckily, I believe their latest number for 2021 is that the US economy will grow by 4.7%, and the global economy will grow by a little bit more than that. So I'm very optimistic about international trade and development, particularly in this region. This year is going to hurt. Most foreign direct investment experts estimate that FDI into the US will drop by 5 to 15% for this year. So in Northwest Ohio, over the past 5 years, we've averaged about $1 billion every year and about 800 new jobs from foreign direct investment. So we anticipate a drop of 5–10% or so for that. However, in the long term, most people agree that foreign direct investment around the world will increase as companies, no matter what industry they're in, want to become local for local. They want to tighten up their supply chain. And most are very optimistic about the US. Why? It's a relatively stable economy. It's the largest developed market in the world. It has good infrastructure, etc. So I see a good 2021 for foreign direct investment into the US and into the region. If you look at what has happened with this crisis, the breakdown in supply chain, a lot of companies are thinking about 2011 and what happened in Japan with the earthquake and the tsunami. And Japanese companies, including many of the Japanese companies that have operations in Northwest Ohio, decided, why are we shipping all those containers from China or elsewhere on the other side of the world when we can manufacture more of those components and more of those products local to our markets? So I'm very optimistic that with the 180 foreign-owned operations in Northwest Ohio, we'll see growth and expansions from them, and we'll see new companies wanting to set up operations in Northwest Ohio from Europe, from Canada, and from Asia. Finally, one factor that I think is really good for foreign direct investment into the US is the distaste for manufacturing goods in China to ship to the US and the North American markets. Nothing against China's politics or the people. However, it makes more sense to manufacture locally, particularly because the advantage of China being seen as a low-cost place to do business is tending to disintegrate. Wages are going up, cost of real estate is going up, you have tariff wars going on, and the demand in China is therefore raising the cost of commodities and goods. So it's not as cheap as it used to be to manufacture in China and sell to the US. So I'm very optimistic about FDI into the US and into the region. Next slide, please. And in going around and presenting Northwest Ohio as an area to do business for companies around the world, we have a very, very good case. Regional Growth Partnership itself has made massive outreach to the 180 foreign-owned operations in this region. My dear colleagues Chase Eikenberry and Andy Lorenz have done a great job at making sure that all of those companies are okay and trying to see how we and our partners with Jobs Ohio and you all local economic development organizations can help them. We're also very fortunate that Jobs Ohio is very strong and very stable and looking at innovative programs to help companies from around the world to expand and to grow in Ohio. We're very fortunate that Jobs Ohio works with RGP and our counterparts around the state, Team Neo, Cincinnati Ready, and the others. And Jobs Ohio is brainstorming to come up with new programs that can help overseas companies to grow their operations in Ohio. We're really, really, really fortunate that Governor DeWine and Lieutenant Governor Husted have been well received on the world stage for how they have handled this crisis. The PR on them and Ohio and what it is doing with COVID-19 is excellent. I mean, the BBC even did a great article on the governor and how he acted quickly and responsibly. So if you can't tell, I'm very much a cheerleader for foreign investment. I think it's going to go great. In terms of exports, there are going to be short-term drops in exports. Nobody knows what's going to happen in the next 2 weeks, 30 days, even 90 days. However, because of the USMCA, US-Mexico-Canada agreement, and other factors, again, wanting to be local for local, I think exports to Canada and Mexico will grow very strongly. And there are a ton of great programs to help companies in your county, in your regions, or your clients to get export assistance from the federal government, the state government, local sources such as the Toledo Regional Chamber of Commerce, and excellent programs such as the Export Success Mentoring Program. So if you'd like to find out more about what's happening in the world and how it might affect Northwest Ohio, do feel free to contact me. My email address is really easy, zito@rgp.org. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paul. That's great. And that is a great email address, by the way, zito@rgp.org. That's fantastic. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us this morning. Just as another point, there have been people that have been coming and going, and I just want to remind everybody that if you have any questions, make sure you type them into the chat box, and at the end of all the presentations, I will address the presenters with your questions. So our last speaker today is Mr. Scott Phillips. Scott is a colleague of mine at the Great Lakes Trade Adjustment Assistance Center. Scott is a senior project manager at the Great Lakes TAAC. He is a veteran of product innovation, business development, marketing strategy, entrepreneurship, and he really is very, very quite funny. Today, Scott is going to be talking about the trade adjustment assistance for firms. Thank you so much, Scott, for sharing your expertise with us this morning. Really appreciate it. And your slides will be coming up forthcoming.
Good. Well, thanks, Janie. It's great to be here and talking about the program that we manage at the Great Lakes TAAC, and appreciate the comments from Paul about the program, and great to be partnered with RGP and NORAD and William Vaughn. So this program we're going to talk about here that Janie and I work with is and again, we're part of the Great Lakes Trade Adjustment Center. It's a federal program managed through the EDA, the Economic Development Administration. And it's the only federal support program meant specifically for manufacturers and firms who compete with imports. Let's go to the next slide. So the Great Lakes TAAC is one of 11 TAACs or 11 centers around the country. This is a national program. It works the same everywhere. So if there's anybody on this call, either a business or an economic development person who's trying to help somebody in any states other than Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, just get a hold of Janie and I, and we'll put you in touch with the other centers. We all coordinate together. And again, this program is designed specifically to help small, medium manufacturers whose business has been impacted by imports. And I'll talk in a little bit about why this program is particularly helpful right now, given the circumstances with the COVID pandemic, and why more firms are eligible now than there has been in many, many years. And again, this program is funded by the US EDA. Next slide. So just in our 3 states that we manage as the GLTAAC, we've helped about 102 companies over the past 5 years. Collectively, these firms employ about 12,000 workers and generate $2.5 billion in sales. Almost 80% of our clients were profitable in 2018, as opposed to only half were profitable when they came into the program. Clients have increased sales by an average of 70% and expanded their workforce by 64%. And that comes from taking advantage of the matching funds and the business process improvement initiatives that they've done with those funds. And we do have to track these statistics every year for all of our clients and report that to the EDA. Next slide, please. So there's this program, Trade Adjustment and Assistance for Firms. There is no fee to apply. There are small fees later in the process if you're accepted into the program. It makes available up to $75,000 in matching funds. Along with that, it provides a customized action plan that's based on some site visits, working with the owners of the business to determine where to focus the matching funds. And once projects are undertaken in the program, the service providers can be chosen by the client. We can make recommendations of private sector firms to work with the client, but ultimately the client can choose who they'd like to work with to do a project. Next slide. For the TAAF process, there's really three phases that a client goes through. The first phase is to qualify for the program. That's where Janie and I spend most of our time, is first of all, finding companies to help qualify through webinars like this or other outreach. We help them pull a petition together. We do all that legwork to pull all the documents necessary. We submit that to the EDA in Washington. It generally will take them about two months to do a legal review of the firm. So the program is not as fast as we wished it were to get to the matching funds, but the good news is the matching funds are available for 3 to 5 years. In between there is also a plan that has to be submitted to the EDA after certification. That plan just simply lays out where we want to focus the funds and the use of funds over the 5 years. Once those 2 steps are done, then, like I said, we have 5 years to use $75,000 in matching funds. So that's $150,000 of total funds available. And the company stays in the program until either their matching funds are exhausted or 5 years has come and gone, which rarely happens. Next slide, please. So there's 3 criteria to qualify for this program. I'll go through these, and a firm must meet all 3 criteria. As I mentioned earlier, over the last 10 years of growth it's been a little difficult to qualify companies, but you'll see here that given the circumstances, it's a little easier now. So the company has to be directly impacted by imports. What that means is in the course of the petition, we have to speak to a couple of direct invoice customers who will validate with a short phone call that they've had to shift some purchasing offshore. And I'll come back to another slide here in a minute, but just by way of reference in terms of who's impacted by imports in Northwest Ohio, nearly 60% of the manufacturing based in Northwest Ohio is in industries that are facing an increase in imports year over year. So even with tariffs and other situations that have been going on, most companies are in industries where imports are increasing even today. And also about 80% of the companies in Northwest Ohio are in a NACE code or an industry code that has received a TAAF certification just in the last year. So there's a lot of opportunity, and I don't ever want to leave funds on the table that we could use to help somebody in Northwest Ohio. So that's the first criteria. The second criteria is that their sales have to be down by 5%. And then the third criteria is over the same period of time, their average monthly employment has to be down by 5%. And what's happening right now is many firms who would not qualify if we looked at the last year versus a prior year on these two criteria will qualify now because we can look at a period as short as 6 months. So if there's a firm whose business has been off or shut down by 30 days or 60 days or something in between over the last 6 months, that can easily put them into the qualification for these two criteria of sales down by 5 and average employment down by 5. And the point I want to make here really is we have a lot of leeway and flexibility in terms of what petition period to look at to try to help a firm qualify. Next slide, please. During the recovery plan or the adjustment plan, once a company is certified, one of the project managers from the GLTAAC will conduct on-site interviews, will visit the firm, will interview the leadership team, we'll write a comprehensive analysis of the firm, the market, and the industry they're in. We have a group of grad students from University of Michigan that will do an industry analysis for them. And we'll create a strategic recovery plan. And in that plan, we'll define some projects and scopes and timelines. And that's called the recovery plan. That's phase 2. Next slide, please. So once that step is done, now we're ready to access the funds. We try to get going as quick as possible. Once the firm is ready to initiate a project, we identify the project jointly with them, and we select a consultant. Could be a trainer, could be an ISO certifier. We try to initiate that project as soon as we can to get going and make a difference in the business. And we manage all the implementation. So our project manager will handle all the functions. We'll do an RFP if the client would like, but we'll write a 3-way contract between the client, University of Michigan, and whoever the consultant is. And at any time, they can cease implementation at any time, and there's no penalty. And again, the time period for the employment decline and the sales decline can be as short as 6 months, it can be a year, and there's a lot of flexibility. In terms of the types of projects, and this is one of the nice things about this program, is that the use of funds is very flexible. So there's 5 years to use it, and the nature of the projects can be anywhere from marketing and sales to industrial and systems engineering to cost accounting or ERP implementation. Basically anything that a third party can come in and be contracted with to help a firm improve their competitiveness, our program can pay for half of. Lately we see a lot of things like succession planning or leadership training or lean training or ERP or software implementation. and anywhere in between. So again, quite flexible in terms of use of funds, and I would say that's what makes this a great program right now. Next slide, please. So in Ohio, right now we have about 22 current clients. At any given time, we have about 60 to 80 in the program across these 3 states. In Ohio, these 22 companies are generating about $500 million in revenue and employ about 2,500 people. And we've implemented about $1.5 million in spending on projects to help those 22 companies. The nature of the projects that they've completed, you can see there a list, and everywhere from training, sales development, strategic planning, productivity improvements, ERP system, new product development, and marketing, including website development, SEO, and other techniques to grow sales. Next slide, please. Just some success stories from companies in that area that people may or may not be familiar with, but we've worked with companies like Fisher Cast Steel in West Jefferson, CB Manufacturing in West Carrollton, Manufacturing Assembly Corp. We normally do not provide or list the names of companies we work with for confidentiality, but these companies have had a good experience and allowed us to use them as a testimonial. Next slide, please. So I mentioned this earlier, but this, this is just using Northwest Ohio region and Lucas County as an example, and this tends to surprise people. But even with the tariffs and activities that have been going on last year or two, as I mentioned, based on NACE codes, 60% of the businesses, especially the manufacturing base in Northwest Ohio, is facing rising imports this year versus last year. That number a year or two ago was as high as 80 to 90%, but it's still very high. 78% of the manufacturers in this region have received a certification in this program somewhere in the United States just in the last year. So there's a lot of opportunity in Northwest Ohio, and we really need help from people on this phone call to find firms we can qualify. Next slide, please. This is just an example, drilling down on that last slide a little bit. So there are 161 machine shops and turned products companies just in this region. Those companies are in a NACE code that's facing import increases of about 3.5% year over year right now, meaning that on average, many of them can qualify. Plastics products, injection molders are another high category that's vulnerable. If we look at the 4 of the businesses that face the highest import exposure, there are 9 aerospace products and parts plants in this region, miscellaneous food production, machinery and medical equipment. All of those are up in the double digits in terms of increase in imports year over year. Next slide, please. So for somebody on this call that works with businesses in an economic development sense, what to look for or listen for is just somebody speaking of a situation where they have flat or declining sales, flat or declining employment. Maybe they're losing more bids than historically, and any indication of import competition. A lot of people initially may not know whether or not they are competing directly with imports, but we can help them sort that out. If you find a company that passes these screening points, we just ask that you put them in touch with us. Usually in about a 10-minute phone call with the business owner or controller, I can help them understand whether they're likely to qualify or not. Next slide. So that's it. That's all I have. I'm going to end with my contact information. And just like Kate and Paul, if anybody has questions about our program or anything they said, please just reach out to any of us. This is my phone number and email address and our website. Janie and I'd be happy to help anybody try to qualify for the program.
Thank you.
Yeah, with that, we'll turn it back to Janie.
Well, actually, I'm going to keep you on for a moment. Everybody can hear me. I have a couple questions that came in for you. Coming in, they're an aluminum trading company, and they are negatively affected by cheap imports, but there are already tariffs in place through Section 232 and 301. Are we eligible to receive any of these funds?
So Tariffs are only an indirect impact as far as the EDA concerns as it relates to this program, meaning that if somebody's costs have risen because of tariffs or other reasons, that in and of itself doesn't qualify them. They literally have to meet the 3 criteria I mentioned earlier. And as evidence of import impact, they literally we have to be able to talk to 2 direct invoice customers of theirs who will tell us that they've moved purchases, or at least some purchases offshore. So I think the answer to your question is not necessarily. They wouldn't necessarily qualify.
Okay. And another question that came in for you, Scott, was how much time and effort is required by the business to apply to the program?
Yeah, that's a question we usually get asked right away, and it's an important question because we don't want companies investing a lot of time and effort if there's not a good likelihood of qualifying. If somebody's likely to qualify and they want to move forward, I would say that their man-hour effort is going to be 60 to 80 hours over the first month or 2. A lot of that includes working usually with finance people and other people to collect financial statements and employment things. And then there will be a day when we do a site visit and do interviews with a leadership team. But I would say that it's maybe, it can be less than that, but I would say 60 to 80 man hours over several weeks.
Okay. And I have one last question. I hate to keep you in the hot seat for a little while longer, but here we are. What is the time period used to determine the employment decline?
Yeah, it's flexible. It can be as short as the last 6 months compared to that same 6 months a year ago, or it can be the last 12 months compared to the prior 12 months. And in some cases, we can even do what's called a long look back. So it could be somebody had a business that was way up 2 or 3 years ago, and we can look at a long look back period as well. So the petition period for both employment and sales decline is quite flexible.
Okay, fantastic. So I want to thank you so much, Scott, for taking time out of your day and sharing your expertise about the TAAF program. Greatly appreciate it. Kate, I have a question for you that has come in, and I want to make sure that we have time to talk about it. Has William Vaughn Company seen a great number of business closures or bankruptcies? Or maybe is it better than it's feared right now?
Good question. As of right now, we have not, which is good. I'd say with the PPP and some of the other funding that's out there, it has really thrown businesses a lifeline for this period of time. Actually, there's a few companies I can think of that were maybe struggling a little bit before, and some of the changes that have come out with the flexibility on the loans and things have actually helped them in the near term. I think the bigger question is going to be, as we move throughout the rest of this year, how quickly does the economy recover, and how quickly are businesses going to be able to bring everything back online and get the sales flowing again and the cash getting collected. So as of right now, people are doing all right and hanging in, but I think that there is some nervousness about what the future is going to be and just how quickly things are going to be able to recover.
Great. Thank you so much for taking time to answer that. And my last question is going to be to Mr. Zito. Paul, first I'm going to say I did get a question in and say, what the hey about your hair? But I think that Mike J. who sent that in, maybe?
Probably.
What is the best source of export assistance programs available to Northwest Ohio companies?
Excellent question. There are federal export assistance programs available from the U.S. Commercial Service, which has an office in Cleveland that covers Northwest Ohio. There are state programs through the Ohio Development Services Agency, the Ohio Export Office, and its network of consultants around the world. There are local programs such as with the Toledo Regional Chamber of Commerce and its Export Success Program, and other grant programs from federal and state entities, and other programs available from industry sources. And I'm a firm believer that not one size fits all. And I have very few talents, but one thing I'm really good at is reading a company, their industry, their market, and being able to say, I think you should work with U.S. Commercial Service or the Ohio programs or the local programs or some industry association program or some guy or gal that I know somewhere in the world that might be able to help.
Oh, a connector. That's what that sounds like.
Yeah, so I encourage any of the local economic development people or service providers, if anyone, any of your clients, any of your companies have any international issues, contact me. It takes me a couple minutes usually to figure out how best to get them help.
Thank you so much, Paul. I really want to take a moment out to just thank everybody for coming here today. And I'd like to conclude today's webinar.
Wait.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Paul.
I have a question for Scott.
Oh, okay.
And this is not one of those made up questions, you know. This is something I really want to know. One of your slides says that the service providers are chosen by the client. And you have a number of service providers that you can recommend, such as William Vaughn. My question is, if I'm a company and we've been getting slammed by imports, and for years we've been thinking we should do some cost accounting analysis or tweak our CRM system, or our website is really old, and we've been dying to work with an advertising firm, an accounting firm to have that work done, but we've never had that 60,000 or however much money it is. Can the company come to you and say, hey, we've been dying to work with XYZ company to fix our CRM or to do cost accounting analysis or whatever? How often, when a company comes with their own service provider, do you all say, yeah, they're approved, or no, sorry, we'd rather have you work with one of the service providers that we have experience with?
Yeah. Good question, Paul. Thank you for asking that. That comes up quite a bit. And really, there's three scenarios. Once a client is certified and in the program and ready to initiate a project, they could A, have their own preferred consultant or provider that they've worked with in the past. That's very often the case if somebody referred them to us, like a William Vaughn, for example, if they referred a client to us. So if the petition came in from a referral partner, often they like the MEPs, for example, Magnet or SIFT in Toledo, their referral partner. So first of all, the client can have someone in mind. Secondly, they could have somebody they want to work with, but like us to bid it out to some other alternatives. And we will do that. We'll do an RFP on their behalf. We have a Salesforce database of about 500 consultants that can do about anything in Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan, including a lot of digital agencies and trainers. And then the last scenario is where they don't have anybody in mind at all. And again, what we'll do is we'll make a recommendation of a handful, and we can either do an RFP or just introduce them to the companies to have a call and check them out. So it's very flexible. They can use whoever they want.
Thank you so much, Scott. Please contact, so I just want to say again, thank you so much everyone for coming here, the presenters. I will be sending out, our team will be sending out the contact information for each presenter. Please contact them with any needs that you may have now or in the future, because if you are in doubt whether a program or a resource is a good fit for you, I'd say go ahead and reach out. Sometimes all it takes is a short phone call to get more information, and each of today's presenters would be more than happy to speak with you at all. So I'd like to thank the speakers for their time. I'd like to thank the attendees for coming. And I'd also like to thank the participants. So this